Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be doing a job market update. It's hard to believe it's already the second half of the year. We're solidly in Q3 now, so good time to update everybody on how the job market's going. We kind of have a little bit of a feel throughout the year of how the job market's doing, just based on how many people are contacting us and new companies reaching out and stuff like that. But it is good every quarter to reach out to all the companies that we work with and get an update from them, how their numbers are, how things are going, job numbers, placement numbers, all that stuff. So we got updates from all the companies we work with, about 12 different companies. So we have a pretty good handle on how the market is right now. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll update you guys on the current travel therapy job market.
Hey everyone, for those that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza, and we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel PTs since 2015, so almost a decade now. We started doing these travel therapy job market updates back in 2019 when there were some changes with Medicare rules and things like that, and then we continued it through 2020 when there were all the changes with the pandemic. And so we've been bringing you these updates for several years now, in addition to a lot of other travel therapy content. So if you are new to our page, make sure to go back and watch some of our older videos or listen to our podcasts in regards to all the different travel therapy topics that are out there. As Jared mentioned, we do work with about a dozen different staffing companies. So we gathered information to bring you guys from across the board with lots of different types of companies. The reason we do this is that every company is a little different. Some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them we talk directly with the recruiters, some of them the managers, some of them the CEOs or the owners of these companies. And many of these industry leaders have been in the industry for more than a decade, as have we. Or we've been in the industry almost a decade. Many of them have been in the industry for 10, 20 years, and so they can kind of give us a good overview of what trends they're seeing, what change they're seeing over time. And this is helpful information for you all, whether you are a current traveler just trying to navigate your month-to-month job search and know what to expect. It can also really help for those of you that are aspiring travel therapists if you're thinking about making a career change to jump into travel therapy, or if you're a new graduate thinking about getting into travel therapy. This information is super pertinent for you to know if it's a good time to get into travel therapy. Those are the questions that we get a lot. If I'm going to make the leap into travel therapy, is now a good time? What should I be expecting in terms of my job options, my pay packages, those types of things? And it does vary, depending on the year, depending on different things happening in the industry. It also varies depending on your discipline. So we have a lot of discipline-specific information, whether you're a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, an assistant. So hopefully this will be really helpful for you guys. For those of you that are tuning in live, we're both live on Instagram and Facebook. We'd love if you would just say hello in the comments and let us know who you are. Are you a current traveler? Are you someone who's thinking about traveling? Just say hi and let us know. Shout out to those of you that will also listen later on our podcast or on the replay on YouTube.
Yeah, and also if you have any questions about any of the numbers that we talk about, the job market in general, or just anything travel therapy related, feel free to ask those in the comments and we'll get to those at the end of the video.
Yeah, I see a few of you guys are already on live. Hey Rachel, hey Connor, hey Abby, hi Logan, hi Allie, and a bunch of people on Instagram as well. Hey Kaylee and a couple others, Hannah. Good to see you guys. Just say hey in the comments, let us know if you have any questions. And yeah, and also sorry we're getting started just a little bit late tonight, but we'll dive right in.
All right, so for current job numbers, we asked what numbers are available of current jobs for each discipline. We were actually really surprised. We are back to all-time highs, very close to all-time highs for PT jobs, at least in the last decade. So right now, July 2024, PT.
And real quick, before we go through these job numbers, we put a range because, as I mentioned, each company is different. So some of the bigger companies have, hundreds of jobs, whereas some of the smaller companies may have only listed just their direct jobs, and they have a smaller number of jobs. So we kind of put a range here based on what we got from each company.
Yeah, so for PT, the range is anywhere from 400 to 1,300. So normally we look at that upper end number because that's more of a reflection of the total number of jobs. Like some of the smaller companies, like Whitney said, might only have 400, 500, 600 jobs. But to see numbers over 1,000 now on the high end for PT jobs is crazy. I mean, that's back to definitely highs of 2 years ago when the market was really crazy.
And actually quite a few of the companies, not even just the really big ones, said they had more than 1,000 PT orders. So even some of the smaller companies are seeing this high volume of PT needs. So it's very high, definitely close to all-time highs.
Yep. OT anywhere from 100 to 600. Again, bigger companies had a lot more jobs. Smaller companies definitely struggling more with the OT job market right now. SLPs, 100 to 300. So that's only for medical type positions, not for school-based positions. If you include schools, some companies really specialize in schools. They might have 1,000 school jobs. So it really skews the number some. So anywhere from 100 to 300 right now, but school jobs a lot more. PTAs, this is like the best job market for PTAs since we've started traveling almost 10 years ago. So anywhere from 100 to 300 jobs open right now for PTAs. That's almost as high as the OT job openings, which is crazy. So really good time to get into the PTA job market if you are a PTA planning on traveling, or if you're a current PTA traveler, you probably see the market is really good. And then codas anywhere from 50 to 100. So picking up a little bit, but still very low numbers for codas. Coda has always been the lowest of all the disciplines, and that continues right now.
Yeah, so this is, like we mentioned, we're going to get into talking more about what all of this means for you and your discipline and our recommendations. But as you can see from the job numbers, PT, it's a really good time to be a travel PT right now. You have a lot of choices. OT has been a bit slow, and you're going to see that trend as we start to discuss some of the more detailed questions. OT is about half the number of jobs as PT, so not quite as many options out there for OT, kind of the same for SLP, but SLP it's kind of usually that way, just most of the travel jobs are usually in schools, and these numbers are a little bit skewed right now because a lot of the school positions have already been filled for the fall, so they don't have as many openings right now because they've already filled them. And we're in the summer, so that skews the numbers a little bit. But yeah, the highest numbers we've ever seen for PTA jobs, even pre-2020.
Yeah.
And then CODA is just kind of average for what it has been the last couple of years.
Yeah, so a new question we asked the companies this year was, or this market update, is approximately what percentage of the travelers you have on contract, what discipline are they? So we were trying to see, like, of all the people they place, what discipline, what percentage of their placements are in each discipline.
And this gives us a good picture of, kind of comparing, okay, these are the number of job openings, but how many travelers are actively traveling? And we were just intrigued to see, what percentage of the active travelers, and these are numbers based on about a dozen companies. So that's like a pretty good range for probably the whole travel therapy job market. Maybe not exactly, but it's a good sample.
And this is pretty much what we expected. The vast majority of job placements right now are PTs. Companies said anywhere from 60 to 90% of their current travelers on contract of the therapy department are PTs. OTs anywhere from 10 to 25%. SLPs right now only about 5%, but that's because school's not in session. If school was in session, there's some companies that 50% of their entire placements are SLPs. And again, that depends a lot on the company. There are some companies that really specialize in schools, so they place a ton of SLPs, whereas some companies don't really have any school contracts. So only 5% for the summer, but a lot more during the school year will be SLPs. PTA anywhere from 5 to 15%, and then CODA 0 to 5%. So again, CODAs, OTs struggling compared to PT. PTA, even though 5 to 15% sounds low, that's still very high compared to what the numbers used to be.
Yeah, so it's interesting to look at this if we kind of just specifically hone in on the PT and the OT, because we get a lot of questions from people like, why is the OT market worse than the PT market? We don't have a great answer for that. We did try to touch on this a little bit last time. I think there's a lot of different factors. I think that physical therapists are employed in a lot of different settings that occupational therapists are not employed in. It does also seem that there's more schools churning out more physical therapists than there are occupational therapists coming out of schools. So it seems like just in general across the board, there's more physical therapists employed in the United States than there are occupational therapists. And I do think that travel therapy reflects that. Because a lot of the reason for the demand for a travel therapist is a lack of clinician to fill a permanent job. And so if there's just such a high demand for physical therapists throughout the whole United States for permanent and travel jobs, then that's going to reflect in these numbers. So we saw that in the job orders, the job openings, there's more PT jobs, but also in the number of active travel therapists that exist. There's more like 60 to 90% are physical therapists and only 10 to 25% are occupational therapists. Now, could some of this be because there just aren't the jobs that the occupational therapists are looking for? Maybe. Maybe they're trying to be travel therapists, but they can't be because there's not enough jobs for them, possibly. But it also just seems like there's just less occupational therapists that become travelers compared to physical therapists. So that was some interesting new data that we got.
Ali said the OT jobs minus skilled nursing in schools is really low, definitely. So most of these openings that we're talking about here for OT, they are skilled nursing or school jobs. So if you're looking for acute care or outpatient, hand specialty, those types of things are really low numbers.
Yeah.
We didn't break down that specifically, but yes, most of the jobs are skilled nursing or schools.
Yeah. All right, so the next thing we asked the different companies is just how has the job market been in general for the first half of this year? Again, it's kind of crazy to us that we're already in the second half of 2024. So we wanted to know, what did the first half of the year look like? Most of the companies said the job market is very steady, very strong, which we can see kind of from the job numbers. Some of them said that like right now they've seen a little bit of a dip in candidates through the summer months. Maybe some people choose to take the summers off.
Some said that the market right now favors travelers, which is obvious. If you have this many job openings for PTs, PTAs especially, you're going to have a situation where these facilities are really trying to fill these jobs because there's so much competition for them to fill their jobs. You don't have enough travelers to take 1,300 PT job openings. So that's what we've talked about in the past. Negotiations and supply and demand really plays into that. And these types of job markets where a facility is looking for a traveler for maybe a month or 6 weeks, jobs are staying open longer, you have a lot more negotiating power to try to push for higher bill rates or higher take-home pay or other benefits that you could get that you might not get in a tighter job market.
Yeah, so many of them reiterated that the PT job market is very strong, that physical therapists particularly have their pick of many jobs. This gives you a lot of power, as Jared said. Said that they're seeing solid rates, a good volume of openings, new client opportunities. We get this sometimes. We even get private clinics and people reaching out to us directly trying to figure out how they can get a traveler to come in, especially for PTs. And they do expect that trend to continue throughout this year. They've also mentioned that this has carried over into seeing a strong PTA market. They've seen quite a few opportunities where even if they were looking for a physical therapist, quite often a PTA in certain settings could get submitted for those jobs and get the job offer because they need physical therapist staff. So that has really increased the PTA market because of the high demand for PTs.
Yeah, in terms of the job market being strong, a good indicator for us, I think we might have mentioned this on the last video, is all the new companies trying to get into travel therapy now. There are so many nursing agencies out there. There's always been just tons and tons of nursing travel agencies because travel nursing is so much bigger than therapy. But now, recently, probably the last 6 months for sure, there are so many nursing companies that are starting therapy divisions or allied divisions. And we have these companies reaching out all the time now saying like, we need to find therapists. Can you help us find therapists? And so, we could tell even without asking any job numbers that the market's crazy, there's a lot of openings, and there are very few therapists, so companies are very desperate to attract PTs, PTAs, OTs, SLPs to these companies that are used to be primarily nursing. They're really trying to expand into this new market.
Yeah, so it's really a great time to be a therapist. Now, we keep kind of comparing the different disciplines. Definitely it's the best time for physical therapists. Some of them say that the OT, the SLP, and the CODA market's a little bit slower, specifically the OT market, but it's still pretty strong overall. There still are opportunities out there. You just need to be slightly more flexible, but you're still in demand. And then, as we kind of mentioned with the rates, if the supply is not in line with demand, then that gives you opportunity sometimes to get a higher rate too.
Yep. So then we ask, how does the job market compare to pre-2020? It's always a question we like to ask because that was like last time the market was normal. Like things up to 2020 were fairly consistent. There wasn't a lot of changes, and then after that, obviously, there was a ton of changes. So how does it compare to pre-2020? Most say that it's a much better market now, higher pay, more openings, especially for PT, PTAs. Some say it's about the same as 2020. It really depends on the company. Like that's another thing that we've learned a lot is some companies have grown massively in the last 5 years. Other companies are about the same size. So depending on which travel company you're asking, they might be like, oh, our business is the same as it was 5 years ago. Another company might be like, our business is 10 times what it was 5 years ago. So there's a lot of variation there, but in our opinion, the market is much stronger than it was before 2020.
Yeah, a lot of them said that they saw a better volume and also quality of jobs that they were seeing. Some of them mentioned they were seeing an increase in specialty jobs, especially for PTs, like pelvic floor specialists, neuro specialties, things like that. So they're seeing more of a variety of settings for physical therapists using travelers. And then in some cases, some of them are seeing a small uptick in like certified hand therapists. So that could be a good opportunity if you're an occupational therapist who is a certified hand therapist. I will say that's still a smaller percentage, as Jared mentioned, like those specialty jobs are a smaller percentage of jobs available. But overall, they think some of the companies think that compared to pre-2020, they're seeing more of those specialty jobs.
Yeah, and then we asked, how does it compare to last year around this time? That's something else we like to keep track of. We do these quarterly updates, see how it was last year, the year before, at the same time of the year, because a lot of the therapy market we found is very cyclical. The end of the year is always crazy. Sometimes summer can be a little slower, beginning of the year slower. So right now, people are pretty much every company is saying that it's up from 2023. They're seeing continued growth. Some markets are picking up, schools, outpatient. This is the time of year when people start getting placed in school contracts for the fall. So a lot of companies seeing upticks there compared to last year, 2023. So definitely a rise in orders, more jobs popping up. Even since our last update 3 months ago, a lot more jobs, especially for PT and PTA than there was then. So things are picking up across the board.
Yeah. Some of them said they saw that rates were stabilizing, just kind of like leveled out since last year. We have seen that some of them will mention that, so basically the trend that we saw was everything was steady from the time we started traveling in 2015 up until the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. Everything was pretty normal, steady. In 2020, everything fell off. So if you followed our job market updates before, you know that like through 2020, it plummeted. There were no job opportunities. There was less than 100 jobs for any discipline in the whole U.S. We started to see things pick back up in about midway in 21, and then through the end of 2022, we started seeing even some crisis rate opportunities where we saw the highest pay that we've ever seen. We were seeing lots of like 3,000 plus a week jobs for PTs. Toward the end of 2022 and the beginning of 23, it kind of started to consider what we say normalize. And so that's kind of what they're talking about here is like through 23 and 24 now, they've seen a lot of the rates normalize, where the facilities are trying to draw back a little bit on the rates and be like, okay, we got a little crazy there for a while because basically after the pandemic, after it dipped, then there was this huge demand for therapists again because all the patients came back, right? So then suddenly, and people had left the industry, people had gotten laid off and they didn't come back. So then there was like a rebound basically, and that's why we saw those crisis rates. However, now they're all trying to kind of like normalize, but I think a lot of the companies are saying they're still seeing like overall a slightly higher rate across all disciplines than pre-2020.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how this has all played out. We had no idea what would happen. There was companies in the beginning of 2020 that were telling us the travel therapy market would be dead for 5 years. They were saying things like that. So to see like it completely drop off, come back, kind of drop down again, and it's even starting to come back up. It's really interesting to see how long it takes for these things to play out.
Yeah. So, I would say it's still among the strongest time that it's ever been to be a travel therapist, but some of you guys that got into travel therapy, like in that 2022 period where there were some of those huge crisis rates, we don't see as many of those, but there are still some jobs that are paying really high rates. It just depends, and just not quite like across the board, I wouldn't say.
Yeah. So we asked, what do you foresee for the travel therapy market through the end of the year? Pretty much across the board, the company said that they thought it would continue to be strong, large need for therapists. All the companies are trying to find ways to advertise to therapists, trying to attract especially PTs, PTAs to fill their positions because, like I said, some of these positions are sitting open for more than a month now. They really are trying to find therapists to fill these jobs.
Yeah, and again, just kind of as we've reiterated here, they expect it is going to remain very strong for PTs. You still are going to have your pick of the litter throughout this whole year. It's still steady for OT, SLP, PTA, and CODA, but those disciplines do have to be just a bit more flexible on location and those types of things. But overall, they think it's going to stay strong. They don't foresee any major changes throughout the end of the year. And that's good news for you guys that are thinking about getting into the travel therapy job market. There's not really much uncertainty there. It's a great time to get into it.
One thing that one of the companies mentioned that could be good news for OTs is that The OT Compact might be active by the end of this year or maybe into the beginning of next year, so that will really help out OT travelers a lot. PTs and PTAs have benefited so much from the Compact, especially therapists that like to go to a lot of different states. So for the OT Compact to be active, I mean, we don't really know why the OT market has been so slow compared to PTs. We can make guesses and stuff, but we do know that around the time the OT market really diverged from PT was when the Compact went active. So I don't know if there's any correlation there, but if there is, hopefully the OT Compact will help with that.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll see that come live sooner than later. I know it's been a long road. I think they had originally projected that it would be ready in 2024, and that obviously hasn't happened. So we'll see. Ali says the AOTA says the Compact should be active sometime in 2025. Yeah, so hopefully it will be. But up until this point now, with the OT not having the Compact and with the OT market being more competitive, we did have some recruiters that were saying it made it more difficult for OTs to get into jobs unless they already had the license, which we've always advised people on. We always advise pretty much all disciplines to go ahead and have the license in hand before applying to the jobs. But what we see is, especially with like the PT market, because these facilities are so desperate for PTs, they start bending the rules for PTs and like being like, yeah, we'll wait for you to get the license. Whereas back when we started for traveling in 2015, these facilities were not waiting on you to get the license. That was kind of the norm. And so I think that what like this recruiter was saying is just kind of the norm. Like for the most part, you need to have the license in hand already before applying to the job. And they're probably seeing a lot of exceptions being made for physical therapists, but across all the other disciplines, you pretty much need to have the license already because the competition is there. They could get somebody else in quicker that already has the license.
Yeah, a lot of facilities are very desperate. So one way we definitely knew that some of these facilities were desperate is when we were interviewing for contracts. And we had a few interviews, and I told all the managers that we were talking to that I hadn't worked in a year and a half in the clinic. None of them had any questions or issues or anything about that. And that made me realize that, like, wow, they really want people in there. They're really desperate because, you know, if it was a tight job market and they had other applicants, they'd be like, well, have you stayed up to date with CEUs? Have you done any learning? They would ask those type of questions. They didn't ask one word about that. They just really wanted us to come to those jobs. So facilities can be really desperate right now, which means that they might bend the rules a little bit, or they might offer higher rates if you're a good candidate.
Yep. So next we asked about which settings we're seeing the most demand for the different disciplines. So PT, it was pretty much all settings are in high demand for PTs right now. But especially most of the companies mentioned there's just tons of outpatient needs. And this is new. We've mentioned this the last couple of videos. Back when we first started traveling in 2015, pretty much like 2015 through probably 21, there wasn't, there were some outpatient jobs. We're outpatient physical therapists, so we were always looking for outpatient jobs. But from like 22 through now, there has been a skyrocket of outpatient jobs. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is that they tend to be more like the chains, the PT mills, the high volume clinics. Not always, but just because you see a ton of outpatient jobs listed, they're not going to all be created equal. So you definitely still have to weed out the bad ones. But there's definitely a lot more outpatient jobs than there used to be. But PTs are also still in really high demand in skilled nursing facilities, hospitals, and home health as well.
Yeah, for OTs, most of the contracts are skilled nursing. Second is probably schools. After that, it really falls off. There's not that many job openings for acute care, outpatient, or for specialty settings. But if you're an OT that does skilled nursing, you can definitely still find a lot of jobs throughout the country. But other settings, it's definitely harder. Mm-hmm. SLPs, the highest demand is skilled nursing right now. Schools, definitely, as we get closer to the end of the summer, there's going to be a ton of school jobs that need to be filled. Hospital, and then followed by home health.
All right, and then we covered this a little bit, but just as far as rates go, and this would be like the pay rates, the pay packages that the companies are seeing. Overall, they say rates are at a higher level for all disciplines than they were pre-2020. And we've seen this too, because back when we first started traveling in our first several years of being travelers from like 2015 through 2020, we were taking a lot of pay packages as physical therapists in the $1,500 to $1,800 after-tax range. And that average has significantly shifted. Now, you will still see some jobs in that $1,500 range, but the average is more like $1,800 to $2,000 across the country, with quite a few more jobs, 2,000 plus per week after taxes, than we ever used to see. So it's definitely shifted upwards since 2020. But as I mentioned before, some of them said that some of the clients are starting to pull back a little bit from those like crisis rates, like really, really high rates that we saw in 22. But every now and then we'll still see one pop up that's 2,800 a week, 3,000 a week. It's just, keep in mind that this isn't common. Like if you're a physical therapist and you're willing to go where those $3,000 a week jobs are in the country, yes, you can find them. But if you're a physical therapist who's like, I only want outpatient in Florida, well, you're not going to see $3,000 a week outpatient in Florida. It's probably still going to be kind of in that 1,700, 1,800 range, maybe 2,000.
Yeah.
So just keep in mind that rates vary depending on the part of the country, the specific facility, your discipline, of course. So, there are still some really high paying jobs, but not quite as many.
We've really seen that high end shift over time though, because like Whitney said, when we first started traveling, anytime before 2020, seeing a $2,000 a week job outside of California was like extremely rare. You might see one or two a month that paid $2,000 a week outside of California. Now it's like almost anywhere, any state, you can find a job paying more than $2,000 a week if you're flexible in setting, and you can go anywhere in that state. There's always jobs openings now for $2,000 or more, and then in California, you're seeing every now and then jobs paying $3,000 or more. So yeah, the average has really shifted up, and the high end has really shifted up. So that is a good thing. Bill rates are definitely higher than they were pre 2020, and they seem to be gradually increasing over time.
And just remember, it always goes back to supply and demand. If there's not a ton of candidates for the job, it gives you more negotiating power. If you're a physical therapist who's kind of willing to go wherever, and then you're submitting for a random job in the Midwest that nobody else is submitting for, you and your recruiter might be able to be savvy and work with you and say, I don't think they have a lot of candidates for this job. We can probably ask for higher. Versus if you're an occupational therapist who's only looking in a specific location, or really anybody, if you're only looking in San Diego, well, now there's a lot more competition for the jobs there, so you may not be able to dictate these higher rates. So it all goes back to supply and demand and kind of understanding where your place is when you're looking at certain jobs.
One other thing to add about the supply and demand that I've noticed is back before 2020, the job market was pretty strong for OTs and SLPs, more so than PTs. And we used to see that OT and SLP jobs were often paying higher than PT jobs. And I remember thinking like, man, I wish I was an SLP. We could get some of these really high paying jobs. Now it's the opposite. And it's because there's so many open PT jobs that the bill rates got pushed up for PTs, and they kind of gotten pulled down a little bit for OTs and SLPs because there's not as many openings. So now I'm sure there's a lot of OTs and SLPs saying, I wish I was a PT because there's a lot of jobs and higher pay. But that's what we were saying, 6 or 7 years ago.
But I will say, when it comes to rates, especially if you're newer in the travel therapy world, some of you guys might be just diving into this, doing your research. You might be getting in some different groups and listening to certain people. Just be careful who you're getting information from, because a lot of times, certain therapists who are chasing the high jobs might say, you shouldn't take a job less than $2,500 a week, or you shouldn't take a job less than $3,000 a week. And you really have to be wary of these blanket statements, because we have taken the time over the years to really understand the market as a whole. And that's why we bring you so much variety of information across different companies, different settings, different disciplines, all the different states, to bring you a well-rounded perspective. We know for a fact from all the different individuals that reach out to us that every person is looking for something different. We have people filling out our recruiter recommendation form, our hot jobs contacts forms weekly, and I see the high variation between travelers. You have your traveler who says, I will go anywhere, I just really want the highest pay, I need to pay off my student loans, I'm willing to work in any setting. And then you're like, wow, yes, you have your pick of the litter. But then I see a therapist who says, I only want to be in central Georgia because that's where my significant other is, and I really only want to work in outpatient. And so it's like, okay, well, now you've really narrowed down your pool, and the job market might be different there than it is in California. So you can't just compare between travelers. It's not always the same. Along these same lines, I also wanted to mention we got a message from one of our friends who's a physical therapist who said, I bet you're going to say in your job market update that the rates are decreasing. And I said, why did you say that? And she said, because I heard that at the company we've been working for the last 9 months, they've been extending their contract and staying longer because they were making a really good rate. She said when they were hiring new travelers, they're lowering the rate. And so certain facilities and certain locations, you will see that sometimes where they're pulling back on the rates. I know this one was like a hospital system that was trying to lower the rates. So certain clients might actually be lowering rates. So it really just depends on the facility, the location, the situation.
There's so many variables with travel therapy, and I know if you listen to many of our videos, you hear us harp about being careful taking advice from people, and the reason is because everybody's situation is very different. Like Whitney said, there's some single travelers out there that are willing to just take the highest paying job wherever it is in the country, whatever setting. And if you do that, you can expect to make consistently $2,500 a week or more after taxes for every contract. But if if you're traveling as a couple, if you're looking for a specific setting, if you're looking in a specific state, especially if you're an OT or an SLP where the market's not as good, you don't have compact access, it's going to be a lot harder to find those contracts. So you can't just listen to someone else's experience and expect it's going to be exactly the same for you. And that also applies to companies and recruiters. We see this all the time where someone will say, I got recommended to go to this company, but then we look at what they're looking for, and that company does not match at all with what they're looking for. It was just a friend of theirs that, say the friend was an OT that did schools, and then this is a PT that's looking for outpatient. And the company it's not a good fit for them. But the company and the person that you take the advice from, they don't know that. They're just telling you, oh, they found me great contracts, it's really good. But, and then also along those same lines, it could be a company that specializes in a certain state. So you might hear from someone online that's like, oh, this company's great. They always get me jobs paying $2,500 a week. But that person is looking at California jobs and you want to work in Florida. It's going to be very different. They're not going to have as many jobs for you. So just be careful taking advice from people because everyone's situation is different. All the time we hear people that get in bad situations or they work with companies that don't have jobs for them, and it's because they took advice that didn't apply to them.
We got a question from Joel about the rates. He said, in terms of seasonal rates, are the rates usually higher at the last quarter of the year, say between September and December, versus the first quarter of the year, January to March? I don't know that there's necessarily a seasonality to the rates. I think it would depend on the area and the job. But what we do see is that sometimes there's a more difficult period where it's hard to land a contract, especially in January, because a lot of people take vacation and take time off for the holidays. And so the whole process kind of goes slower with being able to line up these interviews and get into a job and get onboarded and get started in January. So January just tends to be a more difficult time to get a job. But I don't really think there's a seasonality to the rates.
We haven't seen and just average rates, there's no seasonality to it. But of course, in some areas like snowbird areas, ski towns, that kind of stuff, there are differences seasonally, but across the board, no consistency.
All right, so back to the questions that we asked from the different companies for as far as the job market goes. So one question that we've always asked them is, have you seen any changes in contract cancellations? And the reason we first started asking this is because back in 2020, everybody got fired, right? Like all the contracts got canceled, and then, it was really uncertain. And so we want to know these days, is the job market uncertain? Is it a good time to be a travel therapist or not? And the good news is the last couple of years, they've all said that the contract cancellations are very steady, very minimal. There's not a lot of uncertainty with the staffing anymore. Staffing has just kind of leveled out. Whereas before, around 2020 and 21, there was just a lot of uncertainty in caseloads and people being laid off and all this. So you had a higher chance to be canceled. But the good news is they say that's really not the case anymore. It's pretty steady. If anything, they're seeing more therapists cancel because they found a better opportunity or something like that happened. But the facilities, you do see some cancellations occasionally, but nothing crazy.
Yeah, Allie made a comment about the VMSs and them being a pain and having extra credentialing. A lot of people watching this probably don't know what a VMS is, but a VMS, companies can pay for access to a list of jobs basically that is compiled by a certain company that's called the VMS. So the VMS will compile a bunch of jobs from facilities across the country, and then you can pay to have access to that to submit your candidates. Sometimes the VMSs, like she said, they can have extra credentialing requirements that, depending on the facilities, depending on the companies that is operating the VMS, they can have different requirements in terms of credentialing for contracts, and they can be a pain. So another just part of what goes into travel therapy is that there's some jobs that go through a VMS, there's other jobs that the travel therapy contacts the company directly, and it'll be a much easier process, more streamlined if it's a direct contact, because then it's just the company talking directly to the facility and not having this VMS in the middle. And she also said that they keep a large percentage of the bill rate, and that's true. It can be anywhere from 5 to 10% sometimes what the VMS keeps of the bill rate, and people often forget that when they're looking at how much the bill rate is compared to how much they make. They forget that there's all these other people taking money out of the pot as it goes along.
Yeah, they basically charge a fee. VMS stands for Vendor Management System, and they charge a fee for the companies to have access to the jobs on there. And that can take a cut of your pay. So this is another reason why it goes back to when we talk about like strategies for being a travel therapist. We recommend working with a few different companies so that you can see a variety of opportunities. Some of the companies will have more direct jobs than others. If you can get in with one of those companies that has a lot of direct jobs for your discipline and setting, that really helps.
The process is always easier with direct jobs than it is going through a VMS.
Yeah, and then, so in some situations, you have pros of going with like a smaller company that might have some more direct clients, but also there's some pros of going with a big company where they might own the VMS, or even above the VMS is something called an MSP, managed service provider. They could be the managed service provider, which is basically the preferred contact for a whole hospital system or a whole group of facilities. And so if they are the MSP for the job, they don't have to pay a fee to get access to it, whereas a small company might have to pay a fee to get access to the job. So there's this goes back to like, there's no blanket statement of like, this one company is the best company, or this one recruiter is the best recruiter, because it depends on what you're looking for. Yeah. And that's why we always recommend working with like 3 different companies, usually like a small one, a large one, and then the third one might be whatever, but because there's some pros and cons for small versus large.
Yep. And real quick, Mason had a question about licensing on Instagram. How easy or hard is it, the process of getting a license in states you have not practiced in? It really depends. Some states are extremely easy, very little requirements, small application fee, and might take 2 weeks. Other states like California, you're gonna have to get a background check, fingerprinting, all the extra requirements they have. You have to go take you don't have to take the jurisprudence anymore at a testing center. Some states require you to go to a testing center to take a jurisprudence test on their state laws. So that can change how long it takes, but California can take 2 or 3 months, whereas some states might take a week or 2 weeks. So it really depends on the state.
In regards to the contract cancellations, Rachel had a question. She said, is it true that there are higher contract cancellations in more popular travel destinations? So yes, and the reason why this is, it goes back to supply and demand. So quite often the reason that they might need a traveler is because they're having trouble staffing the permanent position. That's the majority of the time. Sometimes you'll see like temporary needs for like seasonality, like snowbird season in Arizona, or you might see maternity leaves and that kind of thing that are more temporary, but the vast majority of travel jobs are open because they're having trouble filling the permanent position. So that's the reason why the popular destinations, one, you don't see as many openings because they don't have trouble filling their jobs. They have plenty of applicants. And say they do go through a small lull where somebody quit all of a sudden and they do need a travel therapist temporarily, you're way more likely to get canceled because they're way more likely to find somebody to fill that job permanently. Like if it's a San Diego contract, they have a lot more applicants than the middle of nowhere Kansas, where you're less likely to get canceled. So that goes back to just kind of understanding the supply and demand and the reasons why they need travel therapists.
And one other thing to add to that is, let's say it's a popular destination a lot of travelers want to go to. If they have a lull in their caseload, say they suddenly have a drop in new patients, they're much more willing to get rid of their traveler because they know they can get another one in there in a week. Whereas if you're in a place like Virginia, where we're from, if we're applying to jobs around here, they might have to wait 6 weeks to find a new candidate. So even if their caseload drops off, they're not going to let you go because they want to keep you there just in case it picks back up. They're not going to be so willing to just get rid of their traveler like you might at a more high demand destination.
Yeah. All right. So
we have a couple more questions on Instagram, but we'll finish this and then we'll get to those in just a minute.
Yep.
So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask those. But we'll finish this real quick and then we'll get to the questions.
Yeah. So the next question that we ask the companies are new graduates having luck getting placed? And this is kind of like we're going to be a broken record again, right? So this goes back to supply and demand. For the disciplines that are really in demand, aka physical therapists, you have a lot more luck as a newer graduate because if you think about it, most of these companies, if possible, would prefer to get an experienced clinician in there, right? But if they're not having enough candidates, then they're more willing to take on a new graduate. So it's a lot easier for a new graduate physical therapist to find travel therapy jobs. We have not seen any difficulty with new graduate physical therapists finding travel therapy jobs, except again, in some of those really popular destinations. You may not be as good of a candidate for the San Diego job. That doesn't mean that you can't. We have seen some new grads go and work in San Diego within their first year of practice. It's possible, but it's just not as likely.
Yeah.
So new grad PTs, super easy to get travel therapy jobs. The other disciplines, it's more like if you're open to location and setting. We see a lot of new grad OTs, even some new grad PTAs, CODAs, being able to find travel therapy jobs just if they're more flexible on location and setting. In general, we usually don't recommend that assistants travel as new grads, PTAs and CODAs, because the job market is usually more competitive and it makes it a lot more challenging for you to get consistent back-to-back jobs. And we see that when there's not as much demand, especially for CODAs, you're way more likely to get canceled. You're way more likely to get into a bad situation because they were really desperate. You might move across the country and then get canceled, and then you're out a lot of money. So in general, we usually recommend that new grad physical therapist assistants and CODAs get some experience first, just to make yourself more competitive and also build some savings. However, that hasn't been quite as much the case for PTAs lately, just because the PTA job market has picked up. So we have seen new grad PTAs having an easier time getting canceled.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to new grad SLPs, it's a different story because of the way that the SLP system is set up. So if you're an SLP, you obviously know you have to go through your clinical fellowship year. And that requires a certain amount of supervision because you're not fully licensed yet. So when you're in your CF year, it is harder to get placed as a travel therapist because the facility has to have somebody that can provide you those supervision hours that are required for your license. But there are places that are willing to do it. Usually it's going to be schools. But once you have your Cs after your clinical fellowship year, if you're an SLP CCC, new grad, even if you've just gotten your Cs, you should be good to go. You'll have a good opportunity to find jobs.
Yep. Okay, and then we asked about the assistant market. We've already talked about this a little bit. How's the market for PTAs and CODAs? Market is very strong for PTAs, not very great for CODAs. PTAs, the demand is all-time highs, at least that we've seen in the last decade. So great time to be a PTA traveler. CODA's still difficult. You have to be very flexible. You want to have multiple state licenses for sure. Still, if you're a CODA and you get a California license, you can find jobs, but it is a lot harder to find consistent back-to-back contracts. Whereas a PTA, especially having the benefit of the compact, you should be able to pretty easily find back-to-back contracts right now.
I did want to mention a couple other things about the new grads that I forgot to say. We saw that with there being such a high demand for physical therapists, even some of the recruiters are being able to place new grad physical therapists before passing their board exam, which just goes to show how in demand they are. There are some clients and facilities that are willing to interview a new grad PT even before they pass the board exam. Sometimes this puts you in a bad situation if you don't pass the first try and then you have to cancel the contract, but just so you know, some of them are having luck. So if you're a new grad, if you haven't taken boards yet, there are some opportunities right now for you to go ahead and start interviewing and submitting to jobs even before you take your boards, but some people just prefer to wait till after. But we've had a lot of new grad PTs reaching out to us lately. So if you're in that situation, if you're a new grad PT who's watching, please reach out to us. We'd love to help get you connected to start looking for your travel therapy jobs and offer any advice. For those that don't know, we started traveling as new grad PTs, and we've had a good experience over the years, but the job market was a little tighter back in 2015-16 when we were new grads. Now is an even better time than ever to be a new grad PT, so reach out if that's you. Do also want to mention something about settings for new grads. So it does sometimes depend on the setting. Hospitals and home health companies quite often do want experience, so it is a little harder as a new grad to get into those settings. Not impossible, but a little harder. Generally what we recommend is if you're looking you want to do acute care, you want to do hospital, as a new grad, you have an easier time getting into rural hospital systems, those smaller hospitals that are a little more willing to do some training and take you on without having had prior work history. Yet it's going to be harder to get into those like level 1 trauma centers as a brand new grad. But if you can get your foot in the door with a rural contract for 3 or 6 months, then it'll boost your resume for others. There are certain home health companies that are willing to train, and this goes for whether you're a new grad or a clinician who just hasn't had experience in that setting before. This one is when it really helps to have a great recruiter that has experience with different home health companies, because they might know of a home health client, like, oh yes, I've had therapists here at this home health organization before. They are willing to do training and ramp up time and that sort of thing, but not all home health companies are.
Yep. Okay, and then we asked just about other general insights about the job market or anything they wanted us to mention to you guys. some of them mentioned that the nursing world has been hit hard. I don't know if therapists realize like how bad it is for nurses, especially for nurses that got into traveling during the pandemic. They basically have had their pay rates cut in half or even more. In some cases, like they're making 1/5 of what they made during the pandemic. So nurses, their job market has really gone way down. Their bill rates are way, way, way lower than they used to be. So a lot of nurses stopped traveling. There's not as many nurse openings. So like we said, there's a lot of nursing companies now that are trying to branch out into therapy. So be careful with that, because a lot of these companies, they don't really have much of a therapy department. They're advertising to therapists. You might see ads on like Google or Facebook, and it might be a company you've never heard of. And the reason is because they just started a therapy department. They're trying to attract therapists. In some cases that might be okay, but a lot of times they don't have many jobs. A lot of times they don't have any direct contacts. They're only using VMS systems to place people. And so you're probably not going to get the best experience working with these companies that are just getting into therapy. So be careful with that. Make sure you're working with companies that have been in therapy for a while, recruiters that have experience with therapy. That's the other thing, is if you're working with a nursing recruiter, they don't even know what the therapy world's like. They don't know what the settings are like. We get messages sometimes, text messages from nursing companies that don't even know that PTs and OTs are different. So we get ads for OT jobs. So just be careful working with companies that are new to therapy.
Yeah, some other sentiments that were mentioned in regards to like the difference in nursing and therapy. This particular company owner that was giving us this overview, she works with both nursing and allied. So and when I say allied, that includes therapy as well as like respiratory therapy and other disciplines, but she works with therapy as well. And she said she almost feels like there's been this like anger towards travel nurses. Like it's been such a shift where like they needed them so bad, but then some of them really got used to having these high rates and, you know, just demanding everything at their fingertips. And so now there's like almost like the pendulum has swung the other way, where there's like an animosity towards travel nurses. She said fortunately she has not seen that with allied and therapy, but just it's interesting to know. I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
She said that she still feels like most of the sites really appreciate travel therapists and things are still really positive in the travel therapy world, but there has been a shift in the travel nursing world.
Yeah, in general, PT market, SLP market, both pretty good. OTs, CODAs, PTAs, you still have to be a little more flexible in terms of what you're looking for, either location or setting.
Yeah, a lot of them, as we mentioned, they're really hoping the compacts will go through for OTs and SLPs by next year, and maybe we'll see an increase in those job markets because of that, but to be determined.
One of them mentioned to be careful and to do research on housing costs before you apply to jobs. We definitely recommend that as well. We've mentioned that in videos in the past, but don't just submit to a job and interview, accept it, and not know anything about the area. Make sure you do some research. One, crime statistics, how much housing costs, how much housing availability there is, because there's some jobs that will be in the middle of nowhere, but there's no housing, or if there is, it's like very expensive. So just be careful with that. Make sure you're researching the area a little bit before you ever accept a contract.
A lot of the recruiters just wanted to reiterate that it helps in general as a traveler the more flexible you can be. Of course, we would all love to get our top choice in the 3 major categories. And if you're not familiar with travel therapy, the 3 major categories are going to be your setting, your location, and your pay. Of course, we all want a home run in all 3. We want the one-on-one outpatient in San Diego that pays $3,000 a week, right? But we can't always get all 3, just depending on the supply and demand. So it helps if you can be flexible with at least one of them, or with 2 of them. And again, that goes back to supply and demand for your discipline. If you're a PT, you're going to be way more likely to get a home run on all 3, setting, location, and pay. But if you're an OT or the other disciplines, sometimes you have to just be a little bit more flexible. So it doesn't mean you can't be a travel therapist. It doesn't mean it's not a good time to be a travel therapist. It's just that when you go into these conversations, talking to the recruiters about your job search, know your priorities, know what's really a non-negotiable for you. And we ask this if you reach out to us for recommendations, we ask, what are your priorities? And then we can kind of help point you in the right direction. And, you can say, I really want the highest pay and the exact city I want and the exact location. And maybe you'll get it, but and the exact setting. But maybe you won't. And so it just helps to go into it with a realistic mindset of I may have to bend or sway a little bit. There's reasons why they have a need for travel therapists, right? We kind of go where the jobs are, and we're chameleons and we're flexible and we hop around to where the needs are. So it does help as a travel therapist to be a little bit flexible.
Yeah, along those same lines, if you are looking for companies or recruiters that will work well for your situation based on the setting, the location, the benefits, everything that you need, you can either comment recruiter in the comments or go to our website. We have a travel travel company recommendation form. Basically, just fill out what you're looking for, and we can try to match you up with recruiters and companies that should work well for what you need.
Yeah, if you're on Instagram, you can just click the link in our bio, and it just says recruiter recommendations, or you can just go to our website at traveltherapymentor.com, click on the menu, click on recruiter recommendations, fill out the form. You'll see the form is a little bit long, and the reason for that is it helps us to narrow down who's going to be the best fit for you. I read every single one of those forms. We don't have anything automated over here. We're a very mom and pop company. It's me, Jared, and we have an assistant. So I don't have anything automated set up where it's just like, these are the 3 companies we work with. No, we work with over a dozen companies. So I read each one of your forms individually, and I say, okay, Jessica is an occupational therapist who would prefer schools, but she'll consider skilled nursing, and she's interested in the East Coast. And I'll, give Jessica specific recommendations based on those criteria versus Sean is a physical therapist who's more West Coast and outpatient, but will consider home health and only wants the highest pay packages. Okay, well now I'm going to give Sean different recommendations than I'm going to give Jessica. So please reach out to us if you want personalized recruiter recommendations. We can help point you in the right direction.
We just recently passed 5,000 people that have filled out that form. So a lot of we've got a lot of experience matching people up with recruiters and companies.
Yep. Just back to the general comments that we got from the recruiters. One of them just said, we need more PTs. Please send us more PTs. So that just some of them are really desperate to find physical therapists to fill these jobs. So if you're on the fence about getting into travel therapy right now and you're a PT, it's a really good time. You're really in demand right now. Yep.
Another thing that a couple of them mentioned was that these high demand jobs, like someone asked earlier about the popular locations, they fill very quickly. So, or often, if it's a high-paying job in a good location, it's going to fill very fast. So, if you do want one of those jobs, just make sure that you move quickly. If your recruiter texts you about San Diego job paying $2,600 and that's where you want to be, make sure you get their information. Get your information to them very quickly so they can submit you fast. Otherwise, the job will fill up and be gone.
Yep. And then we just had some more comments about the OT market being a little bit tougher. This was interesting. So one of them said that she was at the National Physical Therapy Conference, APTA CSM. We were there in February. And she went around to not only like the staffing company booths, but also like the actual facilities. Sometimes major companies like ATI or just different like organizations that staff therapists will have booths at these conferences. And she said when she went around, she was noticing that a lot of these companies were trying to get candidates like to sign on with them. Like, they're trying to attract new grads to be like, come work for our company and sign on for these like long-term contracts. And she said that basically she thinks the facilities right now are trying to be strategic and get ahead of these staffing problems by locking new grads in. So, right now they need therapists so bad. That has also led to some of them signing contracts with staffing agencies. We know that some of the staffing agencies we work with are like, oh, we got a brand new contract with ATI or with this major organization or whatever because they really need travel therapists. So yeah, a lot of these companies are getting very strategic in trying to attract candidates. We've also heard that more and more more and more facilities and organizations are starting to use internal travelers more because they're trying to find ways to, they know that us therapists like the perks of being travelers, right? But they're like, how can we get them to just work for us directly instead of going through an agency? So we have been getting more and more questions over the last couple of years about like, is it a good idea to be an internal traveler versus working independently like we do through the staffing agencies? We've mentioned this before. There's pros and cons to that strategy. The pros are that you might have more consistency in your work environment. So you might only go to, benchmark physical therapy clinics, and they might have the same EMR, and you might have more consistency in your benefits and that kind of thing. The cons are you usually make less money, and you usually have more limitation in where you can go because they might only give you a choice of like 5 clinics in the U.S. versus 500 clinics when you work through the staffing agencies. The other con would be if you're somebody who does want to bounce around between different types of facilities to get experience in different settings. It helps to be a regular traveler who works through the agency. So there's pros and cons, but some people do really like the internal travel. We've never done it. We always really found a lot more benefit in being a regular. It's funny, I've heard some people call it external traveler, but I think that's only if they've ever like been introduced to internal travel because no one says that.
No one says that.
It's just a regular traveler.
Yeah, internal travel, for most people, the cons outweigh the pros. Making less money and being very limited on where you can go. That's the reason why a lot of people travel, is to make more money and be able to go to cool places. So most people, internal travel doesn't make sense, but there are situations that could make sense.
Yeah. So we'll go through the rest of you guys' questions that are on live, and then we'll also just kind of summarize at the end with our recommendations for you of everything that we went over.
All right. On Instagram, does the company have to disclose that they are using a VMS? So almost any company, any travel company that you talk to, any recruiter that you're working with, they're going to be using VMSs. Pretty much, I think we only know of like 1 or 2 companies that only have direct contracts, but almost every company works through a VMS. They also, most of them do have direct contracts, but it might be 90% of their jobs are VMS jobs and 10% are direct contract jobs. So you can always ask your recruiter and say, if there's a job that you're interested in, you can ask if it's a VMS job or if it's a direct client of theirs. It doesn't really give you that much information though, except for, like we mentioned earlier, there might be more credentialing requirements. If it is a VMS job, there's going to be a fee taken out of it. You won't know anything about that fee because that's already taken out before they're ever presenting you a pay package. So it doesn't really help you that much to know that, but almost every company does work with VMSs and MSPs, but they usually have some direct clients as well.
So where it's going to mostly come up, and I think probably the reason why you're asking this is because you're like, well, if I could stay ahead of the game and avoid the pitfall of going through a VMS job, I would like to do that, right? So I think this is where it really helps to have a good relationship with your recruiter. This goes back to strategy. We've talked about this before, but a lot of times people will not really know how to get started with travel therapy, and they'll just hop in different groups or job boards and just get connected with a recruiter that way. And the problem here is if you're hopping around just from job board to job board, you don't really have a good relationship with the recruiter. The way that we've always done it is we've always gone off recommendations from current travelers. That's how we got started. That's how we've grown over the years, is through relationship building and word of mouth and doing research on who's a good fit. When you build relationships like this and you have a strong relationship with 1 to 3 recruiters, they're going to explain the process to you more. And this is where you learn some of these little tips and tricks about, like, maybe through the process of them explaining to you about this job versus this job, they might say, hey, I do have this job. It is in the city you want. I just want to let you know that maybe it's going to pay a little lower because it's a VMS job. Or maybe it's going to pay a little higher because it's a direct job. Or maybe I can get you an interview quicker because it's a direct job. Or maybe we're going to have to jump through some more hoops if it's a VMS job. So these conversations come up when you have more of that relationship-based relationship, for lack of a better word, with your recruiter. And it also really helps just because they can go to bat for you more. Like, if you're working with them more one-on-one to compare job options, they're going to give you like the inside scoop of like, hey, I know this job is paying kind of low. There's only so much control I have over that because of X, Y, and Z. One of those factors might be a VMS, or one of those factors might be there's a lot of candidates, or one of those
factors might be a low bill rate.
It just might, so there's a lot of things. So when you have a good relationship with a recruiter, they disclose more information to you and help strategize with you to find the best jobs. So don't just be out here like, I'm afraid of VMS jobs. Like, that's fine to take a VMS job, but just know that if you're trying to strategize and you're trying to negotiate, this could be one of many factors that could affect your ability to negotiate.
Yep. Is it safe to move somewhere for a year and try to get travel contracts in that area for the year? I know you said in other videos it's considered travel up to 12 months. It really depends. There are areas that you could go to, like Sacramento, around that area, around the Bay Area. You can probably find consistent contracts for a whole year, live there for a year, and then move. There are some other areas, like say you want to go to Orlando or Key West or something like that. You're not going to find consistent contracts. Or Utah, anywhere in Utah, there's very few jobs there. So it depends on where you'd want to move to as to whether or not you'd be able to find consistent contracts. But assuming that you can, yes, you're fine to, as long as you have a tax home, you go there, stay for 12 months, and then leave, go somewhere else, you're completely fine to do that.
Allie said in regard to what I just said about VMSs, she said that's correct in her experience about VMS and her recruiter. She says, my recruiter has worked with me for more than 5 years, and she gives me the heads up all the time. So Allie has a good relationship with her recruiter who discloses some of this information to her and helps her to strategize when they're looking for contracts together. And so that's why, that's something that Allie is keen on, understanding that part of the process.
Oh, some context on that question. For reference, I plan to move to Tampa for a year. It's going to be very difficult to find consistent contracts in Tampa. It's hard to find even one contract around that area. So I would not plan to move there and take consistent travel contracts. It would be really hard.
In regards to internal travel, Joel says, I worked as an internal traveler in 2022 in California, and that was actually one of the highest paying travel jobs that I had, but they ended that program in 2023. So, Joel, I would be really intrigued to know what type of company that was. What setting were you in? Was it a hospital? Was it home health? Was it outpatient? In our experience, especially for outpatient, we've heard that they pay lower. We've talked to a lot of physical therapists who took internal outpatient jobs with one of these big chains, and it seemed to pay a lot lower, but I'd be interested to know which setting and what
If I had to guess, I would say 2022, that was probably when companies were very desperate to keep people. So they probably made just a really high offer to have you there temporarily, work for their company, but definitely not usually a normal thing.
Yeah, from our experience.
Instagram, someone said, it took me 3 weeks to get my California OT license. That was earlier when I was talking about how long licensing takes. I think California OT licenses go faster than PT. PT can sometimes be, I mean, we've heard people 3 or 4 months before. So just make sure you plan ahead if you're trying to get a California license as a PT.
Joel mentioned in response to that, it was an inpatient rehab hospital that had 35 locations. So yeah, I think that in 22, the hospital systems were really trying to do what we were talking about, where they're strategizing to keep employees and not have to utilize travelers through agencies as much. I think they were doing it with nurses too, because they were just bleeding money on these crisis rates. So they were like, okay, if you just come work for us directly, we'll pay you a competitive rate. But as you mentioned, that program with that company ended in 23 because they started to taper off these crisis rates across nursing, across therapy, across all of that, and go back to the pre-2020 norms. So I think that was a rare occasion that you capitalized on, which I'm really excited for you that you did capitalize on it.
Another question on Instagram, why is there a higher demand in general for contracts / travel therapists currently compared to 6 to 7 years ago? So we've talked about this in prior videos, but we think a huge part of it is that the PT outpatient, so for PT and PTA outpatient jobs have blown up. I mean, if you go to any clinic in your area, chances are their caseload is way higher than it used to be. You see outpatient clinics expanding like crazy. The last place we worked as travelers, they had a waiting list of several weeks, and the whole area, every outpatient clinic had massive waiting lists. So I think it's just a product of being a lot more baby boomers, a lot more post-COVID stuff, a lot more need for these outpatient therapists. So the job market has exploded. Like Whitney said earlier, right now you could find probably 300 or 400 open outpatient PT jobs in the country. When we first started traveling 6, 7 years ago, there was probably 50 or less outpatient jobs in the whole country. So outpatient has really spurred a lot of that demand, it seems like, but also jobs have picked up a little bit for home health, skilled nursing, and I think that really just has to do with baby boomers getting older, retiring, needing therapy, that kind of stuff.
That plus what happened with 2020 is so many people got laid off. So 2020 for so many things was just like a line in the sand. A lot of things changed. I'm sure you've just seen a lot of things change just in the working world. You know, how many more jobs went remote? How many more jobs just changed after 2020? So what happened in the therapy world, from what we can understand, is so many people got laid off during 2020, and they'd never seen layoffs like that before. Just across the board, across the whole country, people got laid off because there were no patients. We couldn't see patients like we could before. So this just shook up the whole industry from our perspective, what we can tell. And from talking to a lot of therapists, a lot of them left healthcare. A lot of them completely left healthcare. A lot of them changed settings or changed roles, maybe went into insurance or some other healthcare adjacent role. And so then when the jobs came back, when we had all of our patients came back, and even more so because they were post-COVID patients, they were people that, especially in the outpatient world, had delayed elective surgeries. So now we even had a higher volume of patients, but a lower volume of therapists because a lot of them just never returned.
Yeah.
So that's part of it too, with the supply and demand.
We got a question on Facebook and Instagram about negotiating. Facebook, are you generally able to negotiate for higher rates? On Instagram, do you think negotiating $200 per week after taxes for a job in rural California that no one wants is too much? So the question here actually answers part of the question there. If it's a job that there aren't many applicants for, if it's been sitting open for a long time, then you can definitely negotiate for a higher rate. If it's a job, say in Denver, that a lot of people are applying for, it's going to be really hard to get a higher rate, because if you push for a higher rate, they're just going to take another candidate. In terms of, is $200 too much? Definitely not too much. I mean, at that amount, the only way they're going to be able to do that is if the facility increases the bill rate. If the facility is desperate enough, they'll be willing to increase the bill rate. So if it's a job that you can kind of take it or leave it, you don't really need it, you don't need to be in that area, then push for whatever you want. And if they can't do it, then they can't do it. Move on to the next job. But yeah, $200 is not too much. We've had situations where the increase was more than $200 just because the facility really needed us and they were willing to increase the bill rate to get us there. So there's nothing that's too much in the right situation.
There's a lot that goes into negotiating. I would say the biggest thing is just knowing the supply and demand of that job and that discipline. If you are interested, we do talk a lot about negotiating in our travel therapy course. Our course is called Becoming a Financially Successful Travel Therapist. We specifically titled it that because if you guys may know us, you may not, maybe you're newer to our page. We use travel therapy to get into a great financial position and be able to semi-retire very early in our careers. And there's just a lot of very specific techniques that we've used over the years to strategize, negotiate, plan well financially, both on the income and expenses side of the equation. So if you are interested in learning more about just how to strategize and be more financially successful as a travel therapist, definitely check out our course.
Jonah on Instagram, considering traveling as a PTA, I will graduate soon. Should I work for a year or two before traveling or just go for it as a new grad? If you were ever going to travel as a new grad PTA, now's the time to do it. But even with that being said, I would probably get a year of experience first. It'll make you way more desirable. It'll open up a lot more jobs to you. It'll make you feel more confident. It's difficult sometimes for PTAs to graduate and go straight into a travel job, especially one that is demanding. So I think getting some experience first will set you up, put you in a lot better position. But there are definitely PTAs that do travel as new grads. So it really depends on you. If you feel very confident, you had very good clinicals, you were independent, then there's definitely a chance you can do it. But I think you'll probably have a better experience if you get a year of a full-time job first and then travel. You'll probably have a better time.
Liz on Facebook has a question about her job search. She said that I'm getting ready to start a new travel job at the end of this month. I previously interviewed and turned down a skilled nursing job right before I accepted this contract because the pay was lower and it was higher cost of living. But now I'm seeing that same job listed higher. They came up on the rate from $1,800 to $2,100 a week. After my next job is over, could I possibly reapply to this job after having turned them down once? You certainly could if it's still open. It definitely doesn't hurt to reapply. It depends on the client. Sometimes they might, frown upon the fact that you turned them down before, but it depends on how desperate they are. So it doesn't hurt to apply. I would really work with your recruiter on this one to just see how many other candidates they have and that kind of thing. But definitely doesn't hurt to apply. Yeah,
chances are you can apply again, and they probably won't care at all. They just want to get somebody in there.
And Liz also wanted to know, how is the job market for SLPs? So we went over this in detail earlier. The job market is still pretty steady for SLPs. No major dips, kind of the same it has been in the last couple of years. All right, any other questions?
I think that's it.
Awesome.
It's been an hour too. We got to get off here.
Yeah, I think that was a good amount of questions tonight. Thank you guys so much for all of the engagement and all of your questions. As always, if you're watching later on the replay and you have more questions for us, you can either leave your question in the comments on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll go back and answer it, or YouTube as well. Or you can always send us a private message on social media or send us an email through our website at traveltherapymanager.com. Happy to answer any questions. Again, we've helped thousands of travel therapists, both current travelers while they're on assignment, answering and navigating situations, as well as new and aspiring travel therapists trying to get started. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have. A little bit about us, if you don't know already, probably a lot of you guys already follow us on social media, so you know that we're expecting our first baby. So we're going to be home for the most part for the next several months, 6 months or more, as we prepare for our baby. So we have a lot of time to put into content and answering your questions and things. Of course, there will be a little lull there once baby actually comes in the fall. But yeah, we have a lot of opportunity right now to help you guys out.
We are happy to answer questions, but we would really, really appreciate if you would search on the website first, because we get hundreds of the same questions over and over and over that we've answered so many times before. So on our website, if you just search in the box, whatever it is you want to know, if there's an article, it'll come up. If there isn't, then send us a message.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. So I think that's something that people often overlook, that we've spent the last how many years, 6, 7, 8 years creating content. So most likely we've already answered your question in the articles and videos and podcasts that we've done. But again, feel free to shoot us a message and we can try to point you in the right direction and help you out.
All right, thanks everybody. Let us know if there's any other topics that you want us to cover. We can always cover those again in later videos. We'll try to make a video every couple weeks going forward until closer to when the baby comes.
Kaylee said, thank you. You guys always have such great advice and information to share. Thanks, Kaylee. I appreciate you tuning in. I know that Kaylee is a new grad PT who's getting ready to take boards and hopefully take her first contract with her partner who's a travel PT as well. So we wish you guys luck and are super excited for you to start this journey. So, all right, guys, have a great night and thanks for tuning in.
Yep, take care.
Bye.